Good evening and welcome to another edition of Green White Checker. The round of eight in the 2023 NASCAR Cup Series playoffs just got underway today with the South Point 400 at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Well, the old adage, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, after some news that just came out, Ryan Blaney is probably wishing that that were true. We'll get to that here in just a moment. But let's run down what happened today in today's race. Um, Coming in, there was already a little bit of an interesting storyline. That was that the right front tires seemed to be a little bit of an issue. You saw in practice that Chase Elliott and Daniel Suarez both ended up wrecking, going into the wall and having to go to backup cars and starting at the back of the pack. Both of them had a right rear tire go down, and this isn't. Yeah, a lot of people might be quick to jump to the Goodyear makes crappy tires argument, and maybe Goodyear does make crappy tires. I don't know, but that's not the case at this one. You can't put that on Goodyear because it's just the way that the team set these cars up for Las Vegas. They set it up to where these cars can run in the middle of the high grooves up there in the banking, and in order to do that, they have to reduce the tire pressure there, the right rear tire. And that puts a lot more stress on the tire, especially when the car is struggling to keep the back end from going around as it is when you're going up on that high banking. They puts a lot of stress on that right rear tire, and oftentimes it will cause that tire to go down. So it's just a product of the way these cars are set up. It really has nothing to do with the tire or anything else. And a lot of people would also be quick to blame. When you look at one other instance where it happened in this race, the single lug problem, because you saw what happened with Ty Gibbs, where he had a loose wheel, and the entire wheel and the wheel hub both came off of the car. And the people would be quick to jump on the single lug thing. But again, that boils down to the teams are not properly putting these tires on. It should be simple enough. They've been through enough training with it. NASCAR has done so much to crack down on it in order to make this a smoother process for them, but we still see this happen from time to time where they just don't have enough time to get that thing tightened. Sometimes it has to do with the fact that they lower the jack too quickly. If you do that and that pin's not completely locked in place, it's not going to happen, and the tire's going to come off. And then there's just other instances where they're trying to rush through and try to get to the other side of the car to pick up positions on pit road, or try not to lose at least too many positions on pit road. You're rushing through it and they just don't take the time to lock that pin. It's just a matter of crew member responsibility at this point. It has to be on the tire changer. That's why NASCAR suspends the tire changers. They suspend two crew members every time it happens. It's part of the punishment. Does NASCAR maybe need to crack down on this more? I don't really think that necessarily they need to, because it's an occasion where you've seen it happen maybe 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks, as opposed to where you used to see it 3 or 4 times a race last year when we first came up with the next gen car and had this single lug thing. So, I mean, at the end of the day, again, just the right front tire issues. It happened to more than just Chase Elliott and Daniel Suarez in the race itself. Happened to Alex Bowman, ended up ending his day. Interesting factoid on Alex Bowman. Yeah, he has not had a top five finish on an oval since the March race back at Vegas. He's just had that kind of a year. That's just an odd stat. And obviously, Alex Bowman missed a lot of time when he had that back injury that he suffered in the sprint car race. But even with that injury, he still has just not done well this year at all. He hasn't had a top five finish on an oval since the March race here at Vegas, and today ended up DNFing. So just continues what's been a tough season for Alex Bowman. Carson Hocevar had it happen to him. Right rear tire went down. He went straight into the wall, and also put the right front into the wall when that happened. Ended up bending a toe link, so that ended up ending his day. Again, we just mentioned Ty Gibbs. He had a flat tire, but he also had a loose wheel. Probably contributed a little bit to that flat tire, because as the tire was coming off the rim, more than likely it cut it down. And both the tire and the wheel both went rolling around the track. That may have been one of the most action-packed parts of the race today. I was watching that aluminum wheel roll around all over the place and seeing it bounce off the walls. But just in misfortune there for Ty Gibbs, especially after he ran so well last week at the Roval. It was looking like he's continuing to inch closer to eventually maybe being able to pick up his first Cup win. And it also happened to Chase Briscoe today. Had that happen, right rear went down, went into the wall as well. So just right rear tire issues are a thing today. But again, that boils down to the way the cars are set up with the air pressure. Goodyear can tell them what the air pressure needs to be for it to be healthy. But at the end of the day, the drivers are just going to take that as the teams are going to take this as a suggestion, a guideline, not an actual rule. They're going to do what they have to do to try to find a competitive advantage out there. And for them, that's going to be lowering that tire pressure. These cars can handle a little bit better as they're riding up there on that high line. That was the storyline coming into today. The rest of the day, you saw a couple of little bits of playoff chaos, particularly with Martin Truex Jr. Martin Truex Jr. early on there in the first stage was battling and racing really well. There's a lot of hard racing going on all throughout the field today. It was actually a lot of good action out there, even if it seemed like the racing was really spaced out. These drivers are really going back and forth at each other all race long, especially the ones that were trying to get stage points and playoff points. And you saw that happen towards the end of the first stage between Truex and Ryan Blaney. They were both battling their tails off back and forth against each other. And that battle ended up being won because Kyle Busch decided that he wanted to be really aggressive and try to come in between them and make it three wide. When he did, he got loose, bumped into Truex, which gave him just enough of that push that he needed to be able to clear Blaney. He ends up finishing ahead of Blaney and getting that extra stage point that he most crucially needed. And then, well, we'll get to more on Blaney here in a second, but Blaney's going to wish that he had that stage point in the end here. But the the interesting thing about Truex is after that first stage is that he made a real desperate strategy call. He ended up obviously again he needed points. He's not had a top 15 finish throughout the entire course of the playoffs up to this point, and he's kind of in desperation mode not to fall below the cut line. The regular season championship has only afforded him so much insurance. He has raced really hard in order to try to keep himself in the playoffs, and today was no exception to that. He raced really hard today as well. He had to, but made a big strategy call there at the end of the first stage where everybody else went down pit road and he decided to stay out. Now, the hope with this was that they were hoping that some other drivers would decide to stay out and gamble on strategy, but this early in a race, especially when it's a playoff race and we're coming down to guys that are trying to make it into the championship four, you're not going to see guys take that big of a desperate gamble this early on in the race. And really, that probably should have been kind of commonsensical for the 19 crew. But nonetheless, they went with the gamble. He stayed out. And, well, everybody else back there on fresher tires ended up eating him alive. He got mired back in traffic outside the top 15 and really just struggled his way through the rest of the race. Kept losing ground every restart. He was going back and forth with his crew chief the entire time after the incident, and those two have a good relationship with each other. I wouldn't say it was infighting necessarily. It seems like it was a lot of tongue-in-cheek jesting at each other, but Truex, despite everything that happened, getting mired back in traffic and in dirty air, which really is a big problem here. Obviously, dirty air has been a problem NASCAR has been trying to do something about. And the next gen car was a big effort toward trying to stop, especially with some of the aero components on it, like the rear diffuser and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, a track like Las Vegas, it's a mile and a half track. If you're mired back at the back of the pack, you saw it happen with Chase Elliott and Daniel Suarez. For most of the race, they were stuck between 22nd and 28th position, and they weren't able to pick up much ground the entire time. And the same thing happened to Martin Truex. He got mired back in traffic. Everybody else was racing so hard throughout the field that he was having a hard time keeping and getting position when he was out there on the track. And luckily, as the race went on, he was able to work his way up. But in general, at Las Vegas, it's just when you're in the middle to the back of the pack, it is really, really, really hard to gain ground. And Martin Truex, credit to him, battled hard all race long, and he quietly snuck out to a top 10 finish. He finished ninth and kept himself above the cut line for now. But the other playoff chaos that happened here, Ryan Blaney, who came in as the last guy in eighth. He was the last guy there at the bottom of the bubble. He ended up being disqualified in this race. He originally finished P6 in this race. So he finished sixth, and he finished 17 points below the cut line. But that's going to change now as Blaney has been disqualified due to the left front shock absorber not meeting the specified length. So that shock absorber by NASCAR rules has to be 22.5 inches long. And from everything I'm gathering, it seems like it was short of that. And so that was an automatic disqualification for Ryan Blaney. And so he will only be credited with 1 point, according to Dustin Albino on the day. That's not going to help him when he was already 17 points below the cut line after the race. Now he's going to be in big time trouble. And basically, if you're Blaney, you were already looking at this as a must-win situation here over these next couple of races anyway, because that's about his only hope of getting into the championship four. And now that's just solidified. It's not just looking at it that way. It is that way. It's a must-win for Ryan Blaney going forward here. And last but not least, there's a controversy here. If you're a Chase Elliott fan, you already know what I'm getting at. Yeah, NASCAR cracked down on all weekend long on drivers that are laying back on restarts. And what that is on a restart, if you are slow to actually get in the gas and you back off a little bit to create a little bit of clean air between you and the car in front of you, and that's giving you a bit of a competitive advantage. And that's also creating problems for the folks behind you because, especially if you're in the middle of the pack, that's causing a stack up behind you, which could end up causing a big wreck and a lot of problems. And so NASCAR made it very clear that they were going to cut down on that this weekend, and they did. During the Xfinity race, I think they had threw out 3 penalties for it. In this Cup Series race today, every single restart was reviewed for this, and you saw, I think, 2 instances here. There was, I think, Michael McDowell or somebody early on in the race was penalized for it, and then seen it happen to Chase Elliott. Now, if you're a Chase Elliott fan, I can see why you'd be upset. I mean, the guys ahead of him were kind of stacking up a little bit, so you could make the argument that he was laying off so that he could avoid getting caught in any kind of potential mess there. But at the end of the day, again, the rules are the rules here, and at least NASCAR was consistent with it. It was evident. If you look at the video, Chase did slow up considerably. There's letting off the gas to avoid stack ups and wrecks and things happening in front of you. And then there's having about a car length and a half gap between you and the guy in front of you because you're not accelerating. And so at the end of the day, I think NASCAR's call was kind of justified on this because they made it clear from the get go anyway that if you laid back on the restart, you were going to be penalized. NASCAR made good on that promise. So, yeah, it was clear that Chase Elliott let way off, and so the penalty should have been justified there. So, it's a little bit more on his part than just avoiding a potential stack out. Now, I get why you'd be upset about it. Chase Elliott still is in the Owners' Championship playoff standings. He's still in the round of 8 in that, and he was, I think, coming in on his owner points, he was the 8th car in the standing, so he's at the very bottom of the bubble. But the reality here is, I don't necessarily think they care so much about winning the Owners' Points Championship. Sure, it would be something great for Rick Hendrick, but let's be real. Let's get real here. Does anybody ever remember who wins the Manufacturers' Championship or the Owners' Championship? Not really. It's the driver that wins the actual championship is who everybody cares about. That's what all the coverage and all of this is all about. That's why we watch these races right now. So at the end of the day, if you're a Chase Elliott fan, sure that winning that championship would be nice. Moving on to that playoff would be nice, but at the end of the day, it's really not that big of a deal to anybody outside of Hendrick Motorsports. So, yeah, say what you will about NASCAR. I don't think it was really that highly controversial that they decided to crack down on the laying off there. They decided to penalize Chase on that. All right, so that pretty much wraps up what happened today. Again, Kyle Larson picks up the win in the South Point Casino 400. It's his 23rd career Cup Series win. That is Kyle Larson's 40th win across all 3 NASCAR National Series for him. And it was kind of clear all day long that really Kyle Larson was the car to beat. He took the lead there on lap 2 from Christopher Bell, ended up sweeping both stages, and in the end, he had to hold off a furious charge from Christopher Bell to get the win. So really, for the 5 team, it was a total team win because they just had good pit stops all day long. They played the strategy perfectly, and especially on Kyle Larson's part, think about with like lap 140 or so, we're coming up on the end of the second stage. He very nearly ended up in the wall. He showed off his wheelman skills there in order to save it. Kind of had the back end of the car brush the wall a little bit, may have flat spotted the tires, but he was able to get a caution that was a big break for him a few laps later when Bowman ended up hitting the wall when his right rear went down. And they took 4 tires, and suddenly coming up on the restart and to end stage 2 there, he started 4th, but he was the only one on 4 tires, so he had to be the car to watch on 4 fresh tires, and he worked his way up to the front really quickly, ended up winning the stage, and just really put on a clinic to win the entire race. So tip of the cap to Kyle Larson, tip of the cap to Cliff Daniels and the entire 5 team. They did a phenomenal job today as Kyle Larson punches his ticket into the Championship 4. All right, that does it for the South Point 400 at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. We'll turn our attention to Homestead, Miami next week as the round of 8 continues.